All right, before we move on any further, we're getting breaking news at the moment. Outgoing US President Joe Biden is holding a meeting with President-elect Donald Trump. These are the visuals that we're getting at the moment. As you can see, Joe Biden meeting President-elect Donald Trump. Now, the meeting of outgoing presidents and incoming presidents, that is tradition. We've been discussing this. There you have it on your screens right now. Live visuals from Washington, D.C., where you can see Trump holding a conversation with US President Joe Biden. Now, it remains to be seen what is on the agenda of discussions. Of course, when we talk of Trump, we know that he's promised a lot of day one items on the agenda when he takes office in January. He's spoken about the wars, he's spoken about immigration bills. We'll have to wait and see how all of that pans out the day Trump takes office. For more on this, we're now being joined live by our correspondent, Susan Tehrani. Susan, thank you so much for joining us. Susan, we're getting live visuals of President-elect Donald Trump with US President Joe Biden. Tell us about this. What is top of the agenda?
Yeah, we really are watching history unfold before our eyes. This is an American transfer of power, a peaceful transfer of power, if you may. And while we won't know everything that the two men discussed, it'll be interesting to see, as you mentioned, what they talk about, what we learn, what the tone will be. We did hear a few words from the president-elect saying that this will be a very smooth transfer of power, quote unquote, the smoothest one you've ever seen. And President Biden was agreeing with that. And then we haven't heard much after that. What we probably won't hear, but which will be discussed, will be what President-elect Trump needs to know going into the White House from the sitting president. After all, he hasn't been briefed on intelligence as much as he should. So perhaps President Biden will tell him what the greatest threats are right now facing the country, what he needs to focus on more. That is the conversation that is probably the most important right now between the two men.
Right, Susan, I just want to take a minute to talk about the visuals that we're getting right now live from Washington, D.C. This is perhaps the most civil we've seen the two be in a long time, sharing a handshake, sitting in the same room next to a fireplace. Now, of course, as I was mentioning earlier, it remains to be seen what they do actually discuss. But we've seen that Trump has a lot of day one items on the agenda that he's spoken about a lot, even during campaigning. There's the issue of the wars. He said that he will end the wars in one day. Then he spoke about immigration as well. So how do you see the discussion panning out on those fronts? Do you think that will come up?
It's yet to be seen. We'll see what they really talk about. I think what's very important is, as we saw, for example, I'm just remembering in 2016, outgoing President Barack Obama, when he had this meeting with then incoming President Donald Trump, he made a point to tell him that the biggest challenge you will face during your presidency and stepping into the White House will be how to deal with North Korea. And so, that was an off-ramp to what we heard after. So I think we'll expect things like that to come out, and we'll get a better understanding, of course, on where this conversation is going. But the most important thing right now, looking at these two men, is the way that they are interacting, what their tones will be. And considering the fact that we've heard President Biden is not too keen on what happened between him and Vice President Harris, it's interesting that perhaps he'll have a more cordial meeting with Donald Trump, surreal to say, than his own vice president if she was sitting there instead.
Right. Susan, you spoke about peaceful transition as well, which is very important. We know that's not how things unfolded the last time around. Do you think that's in a way a message to the Trump 2.0 administration?
I think it's a message mostly to the American people. And that is one point I know that we talked about a lot. And I know our audience is so much smarter and more savvy than what they constantly hear in the echo chamber. But it's also interesting to look at this and the stress on peaceful transfer of power after Trump's opponents consistently told the American people and the world that if Trump is elected, it is the end of democracy. It will be the last election. A dictator will take over, and dare I say, Adolf Hitler will be returning to the White House. Well, if that was the case, then it's hard to imagine the Democrats would have a peaceful transfer of power. So I think it's just important to put all of those election rhetoric into perspective and see that at the end of the day, perhaps it wasn't like that. And, you know, a little bit of sobriety goes a long way. I know everyone is praising President Biden for this peaceful transfer of power and also President Trump, but I thought it would be interesting to look at it from that perspective as well.
All right. Well, Susan, thank you so much for bringing us the latest on this. We'll, of course, continue to track all the developments on this front closely. For latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.